The Fortis Colosseum is a brutal wave-based trial where even the simplest mistake will likely result in defeat. Most people take max range and melee gear, which costs north of 4 bill, which if you like me, you don't have laying around. I will show you the method that I use to defeat the Coliseum without max gear. The Coliseum is challenging, but if you stick at it, you will succeed. I had over 100 deaths before I got my first quiver. You just need to remember that when you step out of the Coliseum, you'll be a better player than when you arrived. Most people use mage or range to tackle the waves, and then they take a full melee switch for the final boss. I would recommend just using melee because it's actually a lot more forgiving. This is because for the most part you're in tankier armor, you can save inventory spaces which allows you to bring more brews, and most importantly you can use the Amulet of Blood Fury, which provides a lot of extra healing in the Coliseum. If you make a mistake and tank a hit, well, you can just heal it up with the Blood Fury. The Scythe is best in slot, but the Soul Reaper Axe is only a 12% decrease in DPS versus the final boss, so it's definitely viable. Use Torva if you have it, but Bandos is perfectly fine, and that's what I use. You need to bring a range and mage weapon to deal with the Fremenniks. I bring Blood Barrage and a Venator bow, and then I also bring an SGS to deal with the Ranger, since that just provides so much healing and prayer restoration at the start of the wave. Regardless of which weapons you bring, you don't need to bring any mage or range armor, since you'll always max hit on the Fremenniks as long as you're using the right combat style. If you're using the Scythe, then you'll also need to bring a weapon switch for the small enemies. The Inquisitor's Mace is technically best in slot since it gives prayer bonus, but it has the same offense as the Rapier and Blade of Seodor. A Tentacle Whip is also fine, and to be honest, this is what I actually used for my first kill. I bring the Dragonfire Shield as a tank shield. As a side note, the best place to charge the DFS is in the Catacombs of Kourend. To summarise, this is the gear and inventory that I bring. Again, if you don't have a Scythe, you could just bring a Soul Reaper Axe and that'll be fine. And if you're going to bring a Soul Reaper Axe, then you don't need to bring a one-handed weapon, so you can replace the Rapier with an extra brew. Before each wave begins, you'll need to select a modifier, which is essentially just a change to the mechanics of the Coliseum that makes it more difficult. Modifiers are to some extent personal preference, but here is my ranking. I just tried to take modifiers that don't have a huge effect on the final boss, since when you're starting out the boss fight is going to be the hardest part of the Coliseum, and you don't want to make it any harder for yourself than it already is. Myopia reduces your attack range, and since we're using melee, this is absolutely free and you should always use it. For whatever reason, Myopia doesn't actually affect Blood Barrage if you're manual casting, which means that you can still attack the Fremennik meleeer at range. You should always take Blasphemy on wave 1 since it's just better than the other options. The first 3 waves are quite straightforward, but they're a great opportunity to learn the basics of the Coliseum. The Fremennik Warband will spawn at the start of every wave. You will always max hit if you attack the Fremenniks with the correct combat style. You should start by hitting the meleeer with 2 Blood Barrages, then switch to the Venator bow and hit the Major. As long as you've left the Ranger alive, then the arrow will actually ricochet off the Ranger and it will finish off the Major in one hit. It is worth noting that you need to put on offensive prayers in order to one-hit the Major in this way. Finally, hit the Ranger with an SGS special attack to heal and restore prayer. Between the SGS spec and the 2 Blood Barrages at the start on the meleeer, you should be at full health. Interestingly, if you keep moving, then none of the Fremenniks will actually be able to hit you. It is also possible to prayer flip the Warband, but you will never really need to do this since you'll likely be praying against something more threatening. There's not much to say about the Serpent Shaman. He will just hit you with Mage, and because you're in melee armor, he'll be very accurate and annoying. If you're using a Scythe, then be sure to switch over to your one-handed weapon to kill them. The Javelin Colossus attacks with range, and every 5th attack they will launch a spear into the air that will land on the current tile that you stood on. To avoid this, you just need to step out of the way of the Javelin before it hits the floor. The Javelin attack can max a 40, so you definitely want to avoid it. The re-entry invocation will cause the Javelin attack to leave a pool of molten sand on the floor, which will damage you if you stand on it. This is problematic for us since we're running melee only, and there's only a limited number of tiles around the mobs that we can stand on. Because of this, I generally try to avoid this invocation, but I will sometimes take the first rank of it at higher waves if there are no other good options, since this invocation doesn't affect the final boss. After 40 seconds of each wave, reinforcements will spawn. For the first 3 waves, this just consists of a Jaguar Warrior. The Jaguar Warrior will only attack with melee, so it can be safe spotted against the south or west edges of a pillar. You should start every wave on this tile and then run to the sets tile on the north pillar at the correct time. To mark tiles, you just need to turn on the Ground Markers plugin in RuneLite, and then you can just shift right click the tile that you want to mark and then select the mark tile option. It's that simple. You need to run to the set tile exactly 5 ticks after starting the wave. The best way to track this is by grabbing the visual metronome plugin from the plugin hub. Once you have added the plugin, then navigate to the settings and change the tick count to 5. Then click on the continue button on the first tick in the cycle and then run as soon as the counter reaches back to 1. The reason we do this is because it helps to block some of the bad spawns that would make tanking on the north pillar tricky. When prayer flicking, you should know that as soon as one of the mobs starts its attack animation, the game has already calculated how much damage you will receive. This means that your prayer needs to be up before the mob starts its attack animation, but it also means as soon as you see the mob start its attack animation, you're free to switch to a different prayer. If the shaman gets stuck behind the Javelin Colossus, then you can set up a prayer flip by going to this tile, which is out of the maximum range of the Serpent Shaman. Then you can run one tile out from the pillar with Pray range up and click to attack the Javelin Colossus, which will set up the 2 mobs off tick. You should switch to Pray Mage as you start running towards the Javelin Colossus. As soon as you see the Serpent Shaman begin its attack animation, that means the damage has already been calculated and you can swap back to Pray range. You need to keep alternating between the 2 mobs in this fashion until you down the Javelin Colossus. The Shaman will sometimes stack in front of the Javelin Colossus on the south side of the pillar. You can set them off tick by first starting on the most west tile next to the pillar and then run east. As soon as you see the Javelin Colossus start its attack animation, then swap to Pray Mage. Wave 4 introduces the Manticore, which is a high level monster that attacks with all 3 combat styles. After charging up, the Manticore will launch a volley of attacks that must be prayer flicked in order. The best way to prayer flick the Manticore is to start by praying against the first attack in the cycle, then watch the tail of the Manticore, and as soon as you see the start of the attack animation, then swap over to the next attack in the cycle. Importantly, if 2 Manticores see you at the same time, then they will not attack you together. Their attacks will alternate and they will attack you one at a time. The Manti Mayhem modifier will cause the Manticore's attacks to be more potent. The first rank of the modifier will cause additional orbs to fire each time it attacks. This basically means that in each attack cycle, it's attacking twice. The final rank of this invocation allows the Manticore to charge its attacks randomly, which means that the melee attack will no longer always be last. This makes some of the pillar souls later in the waves challenging, and whilst the first 2 ranks of the Manti Mayhem modifier are manageable, I would avoid the last rank. Reinforcement will now include a Serpent Shaman. The reinforcement spawns will vary, and sometimes the Serpent Shaman will spawn behind the Jaguar Warrior, and then when you safe spot the Jaguar Warrior, the Serpent Shaman will get stuck, so you don't really need to worry about it. But in other cases, the Serpent Shaman will spawn in front of the Jaguar Warrior, and it will be able to attack you. This can be really tricky in some situations because you might be in a position where you are already dealing with something to the south of the pillar, but now you have this added issue of the shaman poking you. In this case, you can either try to DPS the target on the south pillar before the shaman spawns, or you can try to prayer flick the Serpent Shaman with whatever you're fighting on the south side of the pillar. If you need to pull a monster closer to the pillar, then you can perform a corner transition. To corner transition, you just need to stand on the tile next to the corner, then click the tile around the corner and change your prayer as your character runs around the corner. If you do this correctly, the only monster you will need to time is the Manticore. There are 3 main pillar stacks that you will need to know how to solve for these waves. If the Manticore charges up with range as its first attack, then regardless of the stack order, you can just stand next to the edge of the pillar and step out with Pray range on. From there, you just need to prayer flick the Manticore as normal, and once you finish prayer flicking the Manticore, you just need to leave your Pray range on while the Manticore charges up. If the Manticore charges up with Mage as its first attack, then the method of flicking depends on if the Manticore is in front of the Javelin Colossus or behind it. If the Manticore is behind the Javelin Colossus, then things are a bit easier. All you need to do is stand on the middle tile of the pillar and run south with Pray Mage on. Then flick the Manticore as normal, but after the last attack from the Manticore, you just need to switch over to Pray range. As soon as you see the Javelin Colossus attack for the second time, then you can swap back to Pray Mage in anticipation for the first Manticore attack. Then you just need to flick the Manticore again as normal, and then flick back to Pray range for the second attack of the Javelin Colossus. If the Manticore is in front of the Javelin Colossus, then things are a little bit trickier. Again, start in the middle tile of the pillar and run south, only this time start by praying range. As soon as you see the Ranger begin its attack animation, then you will need to instantly switch to Prey Mage and do a full Manticore flick. At this point you can swap back over to Prey Range to tank the second Javelin Colossus hit, and then for the third hit you need to be prepared to flick the Manticore again. So again, you just need to Prey Range, and then as soon as you see the Javelin Colossus start its animation, you need to quickly flick over to Prey Mage and then flick the Manticore again, and you just need to repeat this. The Shockwave Colossus attacks with Mage. It's very accurate and it hits very hard, but it's quite frail at only 125 HP. The previous reinforcements will now be replaced by a Minotaur. The Minotaur only uses melee, so much like the Jaguar Warrior, it can be safe spotted against the south or west edge of a pillar. The Minotaur has the ability to heal other wounded monsters in the Coliseum, as long as it can see them. If the Minotaur is safe spotted on the west edge of the north pillar, then it will not be able to see any of the monsters on the south side of the pillar. So if you have the Minotaur safe spotted correctly, you can attack whatever is on the south side of the pillar first before dealing with the Minotaur, and the Minotaur won't be able to heal it. If you end up in a position where you have the Minotaur stuck and you can't drag a Manticore, then I find the simplest thing to do is flick the Manticore but then leave your Prey melee on and attack the Minotaur. Then step away and flick the Manticore again. This isn't the fastest method, but it works and it's safe. Sometimes you will need to unstick the Minotaur before you can deal with a mob on the south side of the pillar. If a Javelin and Shockwave Colossus stack behind the pillar, you will need to set them off tick. To do this, start in the middle tile next to the pillar and then run south praying against the back mob first. This will set them off tick. The previous Manticore solves also work with the Shockwave Colossus. Now it's time to put everything you've learnt together to tackle the final waves. These waves are really challenging, but if you've made it this far, then you've already learned everything you need to know, and it's just a matter of time before you defeat them. For waves 10 and 11, I would highly recommend pre-potting before the waves begin. To do this, just sip a brew, then a Samfu serum, and finally take a dose of super combat. These waves are brutal, and in some cases you might be better off just running to the south pillar. If you're going to run, then try to prayer flick as much as you can whilst you're running, and spam click your brews. With all of the waves clear, the only thing left to do is defeat Soul Heredi. The boss has 4 auto attacks, which are Spear 1, Spear 2, Shield 1 and Shield 2. Spear 2 can only come after Spear 1, and Shield 2 can only come after Shield 1. If the boss switches between Shield and Spear attacks, then the cycle will reset, and the next attack will be the first variant. Those are the attack patterns, but it's actually a lot easier to look at the last attack and use it to determine where you will need to move for the next attack. All of Soul Heredi's auto attacks can be dodged with just 3 tiles. These tiles are referred to as back 1, back 2 and side. If the boss attacks with Spear 1, then regardless of what the next auto attack is, you will always be able to dodge it by moving to the side tile. If the boss uses Shield 1, then you can dodge the next attack by moving to the back 2 tile. And finally, if the boss attacks with Spear 2 or Shield 2, you will always be able to dodge the next attack by moving to the back 1 tile. On top of the auto attacks, you will also have to deal with a series of special attacks. The first is the Molten Sand attack. Soul Heredi will pause his auto attacks to call down 6 pillars of light that will leave molten sand on the floor. One of these will always target the current tile you're stood on, so you will need to drag the boss forward. The boss will continue his attack cycle from where he left off, so you will need to remember which tile to move to based on the attack he used before the Molten Sand special. The combo attack may seem threatening, but it's actually very easy to counter if you know what to look for. Soul Heredi will charge up an attack and strike 3 times. To avoid any damage, you must parry these attacks by perfectly flicking each attack with Prey melee. If your prayer is up before he attacks, then your prayer will be disabled and you'll be forced to take damage. Because of this, you need to make sure you disable your prayer between attacks. There is actually a really simple visual indicator that you can use to parry the attacks. Soul Heredi's spear will emit glowing particles while it is charging up. As soon as you see the spear stop glowing, then that's your cue to react. The second you see the glowing particles disappear, then turn on your Prey melee and you will successfully parry the attack every time. Unlike the Molten Sand attack, the combo attack will reset the auto attack cycle, so you should stand on the back 1 tile after this special attack to always dodge the next auto attack. Before using the grapple attack, Soul Heredi will announce which piece of armor he intends to grapple. He will then reach forward and try to grapple you. To counter the attack, you just need to click on the armor slot that he called out before he grapples you. If you click on the armor slot on the last possible tick, then this will be classed as a perfect parry, and your next attack will always be a max hit. Like the parry attack, this special will reset the attack cycle, so just stand on the back one tile after this special to dodge the next auto attack. Crystals will move around the edge of the arena, and they will sometimes use a light beam attack. When this happens, they will first project a beam of light that is safe to walk in, and then after a short delay, they will fire a ball of light along the path of the beam that can deal over 70 damage. To avoid this attack, just don't stand in the light beam. The light beam special hits really hard, so you should always avoid it as a priority. I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who's engaged with the channel so far. I've just passed over 1,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing, so thank you to everyone. If this video was helpful, then please consider liking, subscribing or commenting. That's all for now, and I'll see you in the next one.